In the sweltering heat of late summer 2020, Boukaria pulsed with both exhaustion and unrest. The sky hung low and hazy, as though it too could barely bear its own burden. Dust settled on every surface, coating doorways, windowsills, and the backs of unwatched cars. The city seemed to breathe heavy through cracked lips, exhaling a dry, gritty wind that curled through narrow alleys and piled into corners like forgotten secrets. In those alleys, people moved with a kind of measured energy. Heads bowed, shoulders stooped, each step calculated to avoid the worst of the sun's glare. Market stalls lay half-collapsed, flaps of tattered canvas lolling listlessly in the still air. Children darted barefoot between them, their laughter echoing faintly, ghost-like against the walls of clay brick houses. Above, electricity lines drooped, sagging under the weight of tangled cables and dust. It was a time when every living thing felt strained, and the lines between survival and surrender blurred in that orange light. Ibrahim Traoré, then captain of the Rapid Response Battalion, had grown accustomed to moving through Boukaria without the shield of convoy or escort. He claimed that true leadership required witnessing life firsthand, unfiltered, unmediated. That morning he walked in plain clothes, his uniform neatly folded and tucked into a backpack slung over one shoulder. He carried no firearm, no guard, only a single aide carrying bottled water and a dusty satchel of maps. Together, they drifted deeper into the older districts, where curving alleyways opened into small courtyards, and the echoes of daily struggle rose from every doorstep. Ibrahim's footsteps were quiet against the cracked pavement, but his eyes missed nothing. He observed the way dust settled against faded posters on walls, the way stray dogs wove through piles of refuse, the way merchants blinked under the sun's glare as they tried to sell fruit that looked long past fresh. That afternoon, he found himself in the old sector, buildings built from sun-baked clay, their surfaces cracked and eroded by decades of heat and neglect. Doors stood ajar, as if blown off hinges by some forgotten storm. Two women in turquoise headscarves bent over a small brazier, stirring a thin broth that steamed lazily into the thick air. A group of boys played near a dried-up fountain, their laughter ringing hollow in the empty spaces. He breathed in the scent of scorched earth, stale smoke, and something more pungent, something he couldn't name at first. Then he saw it, a single dumpster propped against a crumbling wall at the corner of a narrow side street. Clothing, plastic bottles, discarded, tins of food, trash spilled out onto the street, and from that pile, a pair of thin shoulders rose curved over in defeat. He recognized the angle of that neck before he saw the face. At first he thought it a trick of the light, heat waves dancing, distorting reality. But as he drew closer, his heart constricted. The figure hunched inside the dumpster was his brother, Moussa Traoré, once vibrant, once full of ambition. Now he sat amid broken cardboard and rotting refuse, chest rising and falling in labored rhythm. His clothes hung on him like ragged dreams, a tattered shirt patched with fabric scraps, trousers threadbare and stained. His hair, once neatly cropped, had grown shaggy, matted with dirt. He did not look up at Ibrahim immediately. Instead, he rummaged through the trash with a kind of dull focus, retrieving a half-empty spray can and some crushed metal scraps, as though these scraps could somehow feed him. Ibrahim stood frozen, sweat beading on his forehead as memory and present collided. The last time he had spoken to Moussa, it was in their childhood home in Kogo, before the move to the capital. Moussa had clutched at his hand, eyes bright, insisting they build a treehouse together. He had wanted to be a teacher, set up a small classroom in their village's dusty square. He had a gentle voice, soft-spoken but fiercely determined. And now, here he was, drinking from a rusted can amid discarded trash, breathing the rancid smell of decay. The weight of it pressed on Ibrahim's chest like a heavy stone. He looked away for a second, blinked to clear his vision, and forced himself to step out of the sun's glare. He left his aide standing at the edge of the alley, water bottles in hand, and approached the dumpster with a mix of dread and resolve. Moussa finally glanced up, eyes unfocused at first, then registering something like recognition or disbelief. Ibrahim's footsteps slowed as he neared. He did not reach out, did not speak at first. He simply stood there, shoulder, leaning against the crumbling wall, watching his brother. Moussa's eyes widened, and in that moment years collapsed into seconds. Their shared childhood, the backyard laughter, the whispered dreams of youth. Ibrahim knelt in the dust beside the dumpster, letting the dust swirl around his knees. He did not say anything. Sometimes, in these moments, words felt too heavy, too clumsy. Instead, he looked at Moussa's face, sunken cheeks, hollowed eyes, and allowed the silence to speak their truth. A call was placed. Medical personnel were summoned from the mobile aid station Ibrahim's unit had set up nearby. He stayed low, leaning against the wall, letting the small team weave between crates and broken doors to reach Moussa. He watched their movement as though through a haze, noting how they spoke softly, how one medic knelt and placed a cool cloth on Moussa's forehead. Moussa flinched once, as though uncertain what kindness meant. He neither resisted nor welcomed the help. He simply allowed them to lift him from the dumpster, his body pliant as dry leather. Ibrahim rose and followed silently behind, walking the few paces to the waiting vehicle. He did not speak. His chest tightened as though braced for a wound. He felt like a brother in shock more than a captain in command. At the military field hospital on the outskirts of the city, Moussa was stripped of his tattered clothes and led through narrow corridors toward an examination room. He lay on a cot, thin arms splayed like half-open wings. A medic, careful and patient, checked his vitals. Feeble pulse, sunken eyes rimmed in dark shadow, ribs prominent beneath pale skin. They weighed him, so light his name floated on the scale readout. The lead doctor, a small woman with kind eyes, examined him further and pronounced a litany of conditions: severe malnutrition, untreated infections in his legs and chest, and advanced exhaustion from years spent sleeping on concrete. She spoke quietly to Ibrahim, who had followed them in, head bowed, shoulders tight. He nodded silently, as though seeking absolution. The doctor explained a treatment plan. Hydration with electrolytes first, then gentle refeeding with nutrient-rich broths. Infection sites needed cleaning, simple antiseptic dressings, bed rest, observation. Beyond that, mental health support would be essential, though those services were scarce. Ibrahim visited Moussa every evening for weeks, often arriving just before dusk. He would slip into the small room, walls painted a dull green that reminded him of a forest canopy at night, and find Moussa asleep or staring at the ceiling. He seldom spoke, content to sit on the metal chair by the cot, letting his uniform's crispness feel foreign in that space. Moussa's breathing changed over days, heavier then lighter, sometimes dragging where once he could barely catch a breath. He would sometimes murmur his name under his breath, Ibra, as though testing whether this was real. Ibrahim never corrected him. Instead, he brought small comforts: a worn notebook, ink-stained pens, a loaf of bread when Moussa could stomach solid food. He left station reports outside and allowed himself to be brother first, commander second. In moments alone, Ibrahim puzzled out Moussa's story. He spoke with neighbors from their old district near the southern gates, where clay homes huddled together beneath tangled wires. An elder recalled Moussa leaving at 18, determined to find work in the capital and support their ailing mother. He found odd jobs, washing dishes at roadside cafes, stacking crates at markets, sweeping sidewalks. But work was unpredictable. Employers delayed wages. One restaurant had collapsed in late 2018, blaming fire regulations, shutting its doors, and disappearing without notice. Moussa had nowhere to go. He lost his identification papers in a scuffle one night. Without them, he could not secure formal work. He drifted between shelterless nights and temporary hideouts behind factories. The elder's voice wavered when he said that for a year they thought he'd gone to the north, maybe joined smugglers, but no one saw him. Then, a rumor of a man living in a dumpster, startlingly gaunt, washed into the whispers. That was Moussa. Ibrahim sat with this knowledge like a boulder in his chest. He remembered Moussa's laughter, how it rang like wind through reeds when he told jokes, how he once coaxed a wild goat down from a rocky ledge with nothing but a scrap of dried millet. He recalled Moussa guiding him down the village path, arm steady when hot wind whipped his little frame, and he remembered the day he left for military school, how Moussa pressed a small carved wooden whistle into his hand, whispering, "If you ever feel lost, blow this, and I'll find you." Now that whistle had long vanished, carried off by hardships neither believed possible. Late one night, under the dim glow of a single desk lamp in his modest office at the base, Ibrahim laid out Moussa's timeline on a makeshift map, a series of colored strings connecting dots that marked missing data. An abandoned shed, a collapsed building, a market stall that no longer existed. He placed pushpins where neighbors last saw him, where social workers reported street sweepers giving him leftover soup. He wondered if Moussa had ever walked past his own image on television, if he'd recognized his brother's face as someone indifferent to his fate. Outside, a rare breeze drifted from the desert carrying the scent of unsettled dust. Moussa lay somewhere in a hospital bed, unaware that his brother was retracing each step of his disappearance. That reality shook Ibrahim more than any mortar fire he had heard in the north. No battlefield had tested him so profoundly as the space between loving someone and failing to know their absence. He resolved to act. He drafted a proposal, tentative at first, calling for a pilot program to identify and assist young men at risk of vanishing into the city's margins. The program focused on 3 pillars: legal identity recovery, access to basic healthcare, and vocational training. But mostly, it was about restoring dignity. He did not collect statistics or recite homelessness percentages. Instead, he wrote a single-line opening: "If my brother could disappear into a dumpster, then our city is blind by design." That line he underlined twice. He spent nights refining it, ensuring the words carried both shame and resolve. In February 2021, he brought his proposal to a closed-door session of the Ministry of Social Affairs. There, in a high-ceilinged room with painted portraits of past ministers staring blankly, he spoke not from notes, but from memory. He told the story of a man found sleeping in a dumpster, holding nothing but scraps, and the fated hope that someone might remember him. He waited until the final moment to say that man was his brother. Silence fell like thick cloth. The council members exchanged glances, some avoiding his gaze. Someone coughed. Then a minister cleared her throat and asked, "A question. Captain, what do you propose we do differently?" Ibrahim's answer was simple. "We look, we recognize, we restore." That phrase, so unadorned, reverberated in the marble room. Within days, the president requested a briefing. The initiative was greenlit, at least in pilot form. Meanwhile, Moussa's health began to improve. Under the watchful care of the hospital staff, he regained enough strength to sit upright, to lift a spoon without trembling. He began speaking in fragments, whispering about hunger, about the weight of evenings spent among rats and discarded carcasses of food. One afternoon, he managed to speak his brother's name fully. Ibrahim. His voice cracked as though surprised by the sound. Ibrahim held his gaze without saying anything. He brought Moussa a small packet of letters, handwritten by neighbors, by distant cousins who'd never lost hope. Some letters arrived from social workers offering solidarity and an open bed in a nearby shelter. Each letter Moussa read became a small bridge back to life. Once Moussa could walk with assistance, Ibrahim arranged for him to stay in a modest house near the base, a 2-room dwelling with a tin roof and a small courtyard. The walls were painted, pale yellow, bright against the gray of the street. He hired a former nurse from the hospital to be Moussa's caretaker, an elderly woman named Awa who had once tended to his wounds in their youth. Awa moved in with quiet competence, cooking thick stews of millet and vegetables, reminding Moussa of meals from home. She helped him bathe, helped him relearn to open doors without fear. But beyond the physical care, what Moussa needed most was a sense of purpose. And so one morning, as birds began their hesitant chirp before dawn, Ibrahim brought Moussa a small wooden frame and a bundle of thread. "Your work," he whispered. Moussa traced his fingers over the smooth wood as though recalling something buried. In Kogo, he had learned weaving from their grandmother, how to craft mats from palm fibers, how to shape baskets. He remembered those afternoons in her hut, the soft hum of loom and the scent of fresh palm. The next weeks, Moussa sat on a low stool under the shade of a mango tree in the courtyard, fingers finding the rhythm again. He wove simple baskets and mats, each one a testament to survival. At first his hands trembled, he dropped the shuttle several times, but the act of creating something practical, something that could be sold in the local market, gave him a fragile hope. Ibrahim recognized that Moussa's recovery needed to extend beyond his brother. He returned to the ministry with refined plans for what they called the Corner of Renewal, a small community center where men and women like Moussa could reclaim identity, skills, and voice. The center would offer legal clinics to restore lost identity cards, medical checkups, and workshops in traditional crafts, basket weaving, carpentry, even small-scale urban gardening. The proposal emphasized visibility, mobile outreach teams, evening sessions in the neighborhoods, partnerships with local radio. He insisted that this was not charity but civic repair. When he spoke at the council, he told the story of his brother again, not as tragedy but as warning. When we lose sight of our own, they fall through the cracks. We must look, restore, and remember. In the early months of 2021, the Corner of Renewal opened its doors on a quiet side street. There were no fanfare or red ribbons, only a wooden sign painted in ochre letters. Inside, the floors were swept clean, and mats lay stacked against the far wall. A single long table held a pile of weaving kits, wooden frames, spools of thread, and palm fibers. In the courtyard, a few men sat weaving baskets, the dry click of shuttle and fingers the only sound. Moussa arrived each morning, moving slowly but with focus. He wore a simple tunic that Awa had washed and mended. He greeted the other attendees without speaking at first, letting his presence be enough. Occasionally, he passed around a basket he'd made, earning a small coin. For once he felt seen. He felt useful. One day a local journalist wandered into the center, curious about the hushed activity she'd heard about. She observed as Moussa guided a young man's trembling fingers across the frame, showing him how to weave tight rows of palm fiber. The journalist watched them, the flicker of recognition in Moussa's eyes as he coaxed the boy's fingers to steady. She scribbled notes, snapped a single photograph, black and white, capturing Moussa's intent face and the glint of determination in his eyes. A week later, her piece ran in the city's Sunday paper, "The Commander's Brother Who Weaves. Hope from Palm." The headline ran above the fold. City dwellers who had never noticed the center suddenly became aware. Donations of thread, baskets, and modest grants began to arrive. Young volunteers, curious about the man who had slept in a dumpster yet now led a circle of craft, signed up. The center swelled, not with noise but with dignity. As the initiative grew, Ibrahim continued his quiet vigilance. He did not parade Moussa's story at every briefing. He let the numbers and testimonials speak for themselves. He visited the center on evenings after base duty, sometimes sitting at a distance watching men lift baskets and fold mats, often weaving while tears slid down their cheeks. He recognized that their pain was etched in their hands, that each basket carried more than palm fibers. It carried their story, their name, their presence reclaimed. At night, he returned to the modest house where Moussa lived, sometimes bringing a simple meal, couscous with lentils spiced with ginger and garlic. The two brothers rarely talked much. They sat on the stoop outside the house, listening to the distant hum of the city, letting the wind carry away the last heat of day. Moussa would sometimes push the woven basket aside and ask Ibrahim about base politics, about the strategies he used in patrols. Ibrahim would answer in small fragments, always bringing the conversation back to the courtyard, to the men who had regained strength. Months passed, and by autumn, many of the pilot participants had regained legal papers, visited clinics, or returned to some form of paid work. The ministry, encouraged by early success, began drafting a national framework to replicate the Corner of Renewal in other regions. Moussa's name appeared again and again as a reference, his face a symbol of resilience. Sometimes he would watch a group of young women sewing thread by hand, their laughter rising like wings in the afternoon sun. Occasionally children would bring him drawings, houses with baskets hanging on the walls, men weaving under tree shade. Each time, his heart fluttered. He had become more than a beneficiary. He was a teacher, a guide, a survivor turned beacon. Late. One afternoon in December, as the sun dipped low and the courtyard's shadows lengthened, Ibrahim arrived at Moussa's doorstep carrying a small wrapped parcel. Moussa met him in the doorway and Ibrahim handed him the package with a slight bow. Inside was a simple wooden whistle, carved and sanded smooth. It bore the faint stains of age but remained intact. Moussa's fingers trembled as he lifted it, running his thumbs over the carved ridges, the same whistle he had given Ibrahim 20 years earlier. He brought it to his lips and blew gently. The note that emerged was soft, hesitant but unmistakable. It carried across the courtyard, echoing off the walls, stirring memories that had long lain dormant. Ibrahim watched, tears glinting, as Moussa's shoulders rose and fell, as though that single note tethered him to every step of his journey. Moussa clasped the whistle to his chest, eyes shining. He did not speak. He did not need to. The brothers stood in that material silence, sharing a bond neither distance nor despair had broken. Behind them, women and men continued their work under the neem tree's shade. Some weaving, some practicing old trades, some simply sitting and remembering who they once were. The center's wooden sign swung gently in the passing breeze as though nodding to both past and future. That night, under a sky full of unblinking stars, Moussa sat at a small table in his room. The walls, painted a calm shade of sage, were adorned with baskets and mats, each piece a fragment of his reclaimed life. He opened a worn notebook and wrote, "I was lost among trash and dust, but someone looked, found me, and reminded me that I matter." He signed the page with a hand steadier than it had been in months. Outside, the city continued its restless stirring. But inside that modest house, a brother and his savior shared silent tea, each sip tasting of Renewal. By early 2022, the corner of Renewal model had expanded to 3 more districts. Programs covered legal clinics, mobile health vans, evening classes in carpentry and sewing, and open forums where men and women recounted their stories, often for the first time. Moussa traveled occasionally, visiting new centers to demonstrate weaving techniques and share his story. He spoke with a measured, soft voice, weaving humor into reflections on hunger, on nights curled up in cardboard boxes. He told audiences that survival was not shame, but the first step toward reclaiming one's name. Ibrahim, promoted now to major, still moved unescorted through Boukaria's streets. He often paused outside new centers, allowing himself a moment to imagine Moussa teaching a small group under the shade of trees, sunlight flickering through leaves. He thought about how a city could remain blind until one of its own commanders raised his eyes from reports and walked the alleys. He thought about the whistle, the baskets, the men who wove their dignity back into life. He understood that true leadership meant bearing witness and never turning away. In the soft hush of early morning, Moussa rose and walked to the center's entrance, inhaling the chilled air. He ran his fingers over the wooden sign, corner of Renewal, then raised his gaze to the courtyard where newcomers arrived. A young man with a cigarette's ash still clinging to his lip, a woman clutching an old photograph, a teenager who could not remember his parents' faces. Each one walked forward tentatively, unsure if this haven was real. Moussa stepped aside, making space. He lifted the wooden whistle, tucked into a pocket, and let its single note ring out. The sound floated through the courtyard like a promise. It carried a simple message: "I see you." And in that echo, each person felt, perhaps for the first time in months or years, that they might matter after all. And as the rubble of the city shifted into the day's labor, as new baskets were begun, and old papers reclaimed, Moussa understood fully that his place lay here, among these men and women who had lost everything and were now finding their way back. He picked up his weaving frame and began, Each loop of fiber a stitch in a tapestry of redemption, each basket a testament to resilience, each echo of the whistle a reminder that no one remains invisible when someone chooses to look.